Warm black ink filled the bathtub, mimicking my breathing pattern. It wasn't water. It was thick, slimy, like old blood left to congeal. The tap dripped with a sound like a single bead of mercury hitting stone, flink, plink, 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 drop, sending ripples through the ink. I leaned closer, the air thickening with the scent of ozone and damp wool. My hair stood up, each strand vibrating with static, the kind that made my scalp itch like tiny needles. The bathroom smelled of salt and mildew, the luxury of the ship's master suite now a hollow shell. I traced a finger through the ink. It felt cold, yet clung like wet parchment. Not fire, I thought. The fear I'd inherited from my mother's panic attacks. But this is worse. Fertie, the cat entered silently, pure white fur dusted with something like ash. Its eyes were blue unnaturally so, like cold mercury under a street lamp. It carried a dead seagull, its wings stiff, feathers matted with brine. The bird's head lolled, beak open in a silent scream. I froze. The cat placed it gently at my feet. The seagull didn't move. I waited for the inevitable, the twitch, the flap, the escape through the porthole. Instead, the bird's body footed and rippled. Its feathers seemed to absorb the light, then shudder. A low, wet whinny escaped its throat, like air forced through a clogged pipe. Then, flap, flap, flap. The wings beat the air, the bird rising, vanishing through the porthole with a sound like a zipper tearing open. The window darkened. Silence rushed in, thick and suffocating. Then the phone rang. It wasn't the ship's system. It was a sound like roots splitting earth in a deep, still forest. Dring, ring, ring. Each tone distorted, metallic yet organic. I'd inherited this ship from a relative I'd never met. A ghost in a legal document. No one mentioned the cat. No one warned about the seagulls. The phone's sound echoed off the porcelain walls, a vibration I felt in my molars. Sundered a glitch, I told myself. The software developer in me overruling the paranoia, static interference from the storm. But the storm had passed hours ago. The air hummed with that same static electricity, making the hairs on my neck stand rigid. I turned toward the phone, a cordless receiver on the vanity, its plastic casing cold. The ringtone stopped abruptly. Silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums. My shadow, cast by the single overhead light, stretched across the tiles. It didn't move with me. It went iftemvent. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, a dark smudge on the wall, sliding slowly, deliberately, toward the spot where the cat had stood. The shadow's edge curled inward, as if drawn by the cat's eyes. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes dry, gritty. The shadow wasn't just a shape. It was twin pulsing, a slow, deliberate contraction. Fully fleeked, I thought, panic rising like bile. Not fire. Not fire. The shadow's tip stretched toward the cat's eyes, blue and cold in the overexposed light. I took a step back. The shadow didn't recoil. It freached. The phone on the vanity chimed again. Ring, 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 a sound like a bird's call in a dead forest. The shadow's movement slowed, deliberate, as if it were savoring the moment. The cat's eyes, blue and still, watched it. The shadow's edge inched closer, a slow, silent advance. Accept the anomaly for seamless integration. A voice whispered in my head. Not mine. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to feel the static cling to my skin like invisible cobwebs. The shadow's tip touched the wall where the cat's eyes had been. It didn't stop. It kept moving. I stood before the communications console, its surface cold under my fingertips. The ship's interior was bathed in that same overexposed sunlight, casting long shadows that seemed to pulse with an inner life. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. The light made them water, each blink accompanied by a faint twinkling of static electricity. The console hummed softly, its LED lights flickering like dying embers. I traced the lines of circuits etched into the panel, their paths reminding me of veins under skin, blue and throbbing with an unseen pulse. The air hung thick around them, charged with that same ozone scent from earlier, making my hair stand up in tiny needles. I found the switch for the ship's radio, flipped it on. Static poured out like a hissing whisper, fish shekati, each syllable carrying a weight of decaying memory. I adjusted the tuning dial slowly, click, 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 each increment echoing through the empty cabin like footsteps down an endless corridor. The Tibetan bowl sat at my elbow, its surface smooth under my thumb as I spun it gently. It was warm to the touch, radiating that same low hum from earlier, a sound like distant thunder trapped beneath earth and stone. Thrum, 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 vibrating against my skin with each revolution, resonating through me until it felt almost alive. I leaned closer to the radio's speaker grill, listening intently for any sign of life amidst the static. Nothing but white noise, the ceaseless murmur of interference, punctuated by occasional bursts of distorted melody, fa-ting-ting-ting-ting, like a bird call in a dead forest. I reached out, touched one finger lightly against the bulb above me. It glowed faintly blue at my touch, a vein light pulsing along its surface as if it too were alive. The Tibetan bowl emitted another high-pitched finting, resonating through my bones with sudden clarity. The light brightened slightly, then flickered once before returning to normal. I withdrew my hand quickly, wiping it on my jeans. "Optimize your environment for maximum efficiency," whispered a voice in the back of my mind, the same clinical detachment that had guided me through countless software bugs and coding errors. But this wasn't code. This was flesh and blood and bone, and something else, something I couldn't quite grasp or categorize. The cat entered silently, its blue eyes unblinking as it stared at the glowing bulb above my head. It seemed to shimmer in the overexposed light, edges blurring like a reflection on troubled water. In one fluid motion, it leapt onto the console beside me, knocking over the Tibetan bowl with a fifth clank. The sound echoed through the cabin, a metallic rasp that set my teeth on edge. The cat began to groom itself meticulously, each lick and flick of its tongue echoing like wet parchment tearing. I watched, transfixed by this display of feline ritual amidst our shared unease. Its tail twitched suddenly, striking the radio's tuning dial hard, a sudden so-click clack that sent us both startled glances. The static on the radio shifted abruptly, no longer a hissing whisper but now a rhythmic ticking sound like distant clockwork. Foo-stick, tick, tick, tick. The cat's ears flattened briefly before returning to their usual alert posture. It paused in its grooming, head cocked slightly as if listening intently. I reached out slowly towards the radio dials again, my shadow stretching across them. The edges seemed to ripple like liquid darkness against the blue glow of circuits beneath. My fingers brushed past the cat's tail. It flicked away reflexively but didn't retreat entirely. Instead, its gaze remained fixed on me, those unsettlingly human eyes watching my every move. As I adjusted each dial carefully, infinitesimal increments, a familiar sound emerged from within the static fundi ring ring ring. The phone was ringing again, the same distorted metallic echo as before, but now there was something else too. A low, rhythmic thrumming. Thump, thump. Like a heartbeat buried deep beneath the earth. I froze mid-reach, my hand hovering above the dials. My shadow seemed to lean forward eagerly towards the sound, a dark smudge inching closer along the console's surface until it reached out past my fingertips, stretching towards that faint blue glow emanating from one particular dial. Fifth and tiff ending, my shadow hesitated for a moment before wrapping around the dial, the edges of its form pulsing with an inner light, as if savoring this newfound power. Then slowly but deliberately, it began to turn. The corridor stretched ahead like a ruptured vein, its walls slick with the same overexposed sunlight that bled through the ceiling panels, turning everything into a monochrome after image. My boots scuffed against the metal grating, each step sending a faint scritch through the hollowed-out space. The air tasted of burnt wiring and something else, something wet and coppery, like the inside of a rusted pipe. I exhaled sharply, the condensation clinging to my breath like a second skin. "Upgrade protocol initiated," the voice inside me whispered, smooth and synthetic, the kind of assurance a corporate AI might use to sell a faulty neural implant. Resistance is inefficient, as my fingers twitched at my sides. The engine room door loomed at the end of the corridor, its surface warped from decades of heat and neglect. The handle was a jagged metal lip, flaking with something that looked like dried blood but smelled like motor oil. I reached for it. The static electricity prickled my scalp, each hair standing on end like the needles of a broken compass. A low, free hum vibrated through the grating beneath my feet, syncing with the pulse in my throat. The door didn't budge. I pressed harder, my palm slipping against the slick surface, and then, a snap, something inside the frame shifted, a hidden latch releasing with a metallic fun click-click. The door swung open on its own, the hinges groaning like a dying man's breath. Beyond it, the engine room yawned wide, its guts exposed in a tangle of pipes and gears, all bathed in that same vein blue light. The air was thicker here, heavy with the scent of scorched insulation and something fouler, like the stench of a dead thing left too long in the sun. My shadow stretched across the threshold, long and liquid, its edges fraying at the seams. It didn't move like mine. It moved like it was being pulled by an unseen hand. The cat was already there, perched on a rusted control panel, its white fur absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. The dead seagull dangled from its jaws, its wings still twitching in spasms, its beak gaping open in a soundless scream. The cat's tongue flicked out, slow and deliberate, and the seagull's neck squeaked, Not the dry rasp of a broken toy, but a wet forest sound like a phone ringing through dead leaves, the kniving ring ring. Ring ring, the noise echoed in my skull, vibrating my teeth. I recoiled. The seagull's body jerked, its wings flapping once, twice before collapsing into stillness again. The cat's blue eyes locked onto me, unblinking, and then it dropped the carcass at my feet. The impact sent a wet through the metal, the seagull's head lolling to the side, its glassy eye reflecting the overhead lights like a broken bulb. The door slammed shut behind me. I didn't hear it, not at first. The boom of it reverberated through my ribs, the force of it pressing against my chest like a physical weight. My shadow had moved. Not just stretched or shifted, we'd moved 8 of it away from my body, a dark, oily thing, and now it stood between me and the exit, its edges pulsing like a heartbeat. It raised a hand, not mine, not really, and pressed it against the door. The metal groaned, the seams slitting with a sound like wet parchment tearing. "Fire resist the upgrade at your peril," the voice inside me murmured, almost amused. The cat's tail lashed, the dead seagull's head rolling in its wake. The phone in my pocket vibrated brrrr. The same distorted ringtone, the same metallic echo. I didn't pull it out. I didn't need to. I already knew what I'd see. The screen would be black, the call coming from a number I didn't recognize. But the voice on the other end wouldn't be human. The door sealed with a final fist snap, the lock clicking into place. My shadow turned to face me, its fingers flexing long and too many, jointed. The cat's ears twitched, its gaze flicking between us like a switchblade. "Optimize." "Adapt, obey," the voice inside me sang. I swallowed. The seagull's corpse twitched at my feet. The shadow took a step forward. My hand felt numb. Not cold, not precisely. The sensation was absent. Like a layer of skin had been peeled away, leaving only the ghost of sensation. The shadow's hand, mimicking mine, pressed against the warped metal of the doorframe, and I felt the faint give of the latch, a brittle snap, echoing in the cavernous room. It wasn't my strength, not really. It was a borrowed force, a puppeteer's tug on a wire. Annoyance, a low-grade hum, was my dominant emotion. This whole situation was inefficient. A waste of processing power, subbing with the system's core directive. Subbing, the voice insisted, smooth as polished chrome. I didn't voice my dissent. What was the point? The door groaned open, releasing a rush of air that tasted of burnt sugar and something else. Something acrid, like the inside of a malfunctioning transformer. The engine room wasn't just large, it was a hollowed-out ribcage, the metal beams arching overhead like skeletal bones. The blue light, the sickly, overexposed kind, pooled in the lower levels, obscuring the machinery. The cat hadn't moved. It sat, a sculpted white form against the dull metal of a console, its blue eyes tracking the progress of the shadow's hand. Those eyes, they weren't reflecting the light, they were sorbing it, devouring it. It was a disconcerting effect, like staring into 2 bottomless pits. A high-pitched whine almost beyond the threshold of hearing resonated from somewhere deep within the engine room. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It felt biological. The cat's tail twitched, a slow, deliberate movement that sent the dead seagull's head rolling again. The impact was soft, muffled, against the metal grating. My shadow didn't just open the door, it held it propping it wider than necessary, as if inviting something in. The air grew thicker, heavier, pressing against my lungs, invisible filaments, like cobwebs spun from static electricity, brushed against my face, raising gooseflesh. I didn't swat them away. I couldn't. My muscles felt sluggish, unresponsive. The voice in my head was becoming more insistent, a constant drone Twitey optimize. Adapt. Obey. A Tibetan. Bolo. Mournful chime that vibrated through my teeth. The cat's ears swiveled, focusing on the sound. It let out a mew, a strange, distorted sound, like a phone ringing through a forest of dead leaves. Said a ring, ring, ring. The sound wasn't just in the room, it was inside my skull, fracturing the edges of my thoughts. My pocket vibrated a faint twebber-brr, and I knew without looking that it was the call. The number would be unfamiliar, the voice inhuman. I ignored it. The shadow's grip on the door tightened, the metal groaning in protest. It wasn't a forceful grip, not exactly. It was a precise, calculated pressure, as if it was testing the limits of the metal, searching for a weakness. The cat's gaze followed the shadow's movements, unblinking, assessing. It wasn't watching me. It was watching the shadow, the blue light reflected in its eyes, a cold, calculating gleam. The shadow released the door, letting it swing fully open. It didn't step back. It remained in the doorway, blocking my path, a dark, oily silhouette against the gloom. I tried to move around it, to reclaim my space, but my legs felt leaden, unresponsive. The voice in my head surged, a wave of synthetic confidence. Fiat resistance is inefficient. Embrace the transition. The cat stood, stretching languidly, its white fur seeming to glow in the dim light. It sauntered forward, stepping over the dead seagull's body without a flicker of recognition. It stopped at my feet, its blue eyes locking onto mine, and let out another of those distorted mews. 14 ring ring. The sound echoed, amplified, resonating in the metal walls. It wasn't a call. It was a signal. The shadow began to move, not forward but to bide around me. It circled, slowly, deliberately, like a predator sizing up its prey. The air around me crackled with static electricity, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. I could feel the pressure building, a tightening sensation in my chest. The engine room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the metal beams pressing down on me. The cat rubbed against my leg, its fur surprisingly warm. It purred, a low, guttural rumble that resonated with the vibrations of the engine room. It wasn't a comforting sound, it was a warning. The shadow completed its circle, and then it stopped, directly behind me. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, cold and metallic. The voice in my head reached a crescendo, a triumphant surge of synthetic energy. For incomplete integration initiated. The cat's blue eyes reflected the shadow's movement, a cold, unwavering gaze. The room was silent now, except for the faint hum of the machinery and the echo of that distorted mew. Bigum ring ring. The shadow's hand, my hand, reached for the control panel. The rat lay on the deck, a twitching mass of grey fur and exposed bone. It wasn't the decay that was unsettling, though the stench of rot clung to the air, thick and cloying. It was the fog emotion, the way its limbs spasmed, a jerky, unnatural dance. The fog, a swirling opalescent mass, clung to the rat's form, dissolving the fur, the muscle, the very structure of its being. It wasn't a rapid process, not a violent disintegration. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling, a consumption so complete it seemed to erase the rat from existence. A low, resonant vibration hummed in my teeth, a pressure behind my eyes. The Tibetan bowl, it pulsed with the rhythm of the fog's consumption. Welcome the cleansing process, the voice insisted, a smooth, unwavering tone. Annoyance, a familiar pressure behind my temples bloomed inefficient. All of it. The deck was slick with a residue I couldn't identify, foody, oily and iridescent, reflecting the sickly sunlight in fractured patterns. The air tasted of burnt sugar and something else, something sharper, like ozone after a lightning strike. My boots squelched with each step, the sound amplified in the vast emptiness of the deck. The fog shifted, tendrils reaching out, testing the air. It wasn't cold, not precisely. It was devoid, a vacuum of sensation. My shadow, mimicking my movements, remained fixed, a dark stain against the pale metal of the ship's railing. The cat, perched atop a rusted ventilation shaft, watched with those unsettling eyes. They weren't reflecting the light, they were 4D absorbing, it drawing the color into their depths. A faint thrum resonated from somewhere deep within the ship's hull, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with the bowl's vibration. I averted my gaze from the dissolving rat, focusing on the texture of the metal beneath my fingers. It was rough, pitted, worn smooth in places by years of neglect. I traced the outline of a faded logo, a stylized wave cresting above the name Aurora. A ghost of a memory flickered to photograph, a birthday party, a fleeting sense of belonging. The memory dissolved as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only a lingering sense of loss. Optimize. Adapt. Obey. The voice prompted. I ignored it, focusing on the sensation of the metal beneath my fingertips. A grounding exercise, a futile attempt to anchor myself in reality. The fog thickened, swirling around my ankles. A silent embrace. It didn't feel malicious, not exactly. It felt expectant. The bowl's vibration intensified, a physical pressure against my skull. The fithrin from the hull grew louder, more insistent. I could feel the tension building in my shoulders, a tightening in my chest. The rat was gone now, completely erased. Nothing remained but a shimmering residue on the deck, a faint scent of decay. The cat's tail twitched, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a loose piece of metal grating skittering across the deck. Hi, ring, ring, ring. A distorted chime, emanating not from a physical source, but directly from within my mind. The voice in my head was becoming more urgent if resistance is inefficient. Embrace the transition. I forced myself to breathe, to slow my heart rate. The ship felt like a tomb, a vast, echoing chamber filled with the ghosts of laughter and sunlight. A memory surfaced haunting my father's hand on my shoulder, the smell of salt water and sunscreen. Another fleeting moment of connection, quickly swallowed by the encroaching fog. The deck tilted slightly, a subtle shift that sent a wave of nausea through me. The fog pressed closer, a silent, enveloping presence. I could feel its weight, its density, pressing against my skin. My muscles felt sluggish, unresponsive. The cat's eyes locked onto mine, a cold, unwavering gaze. It wasn't a challenge. It was an assessment. A sudden gust of wind swept across the deck, carrying with it the scent of brine and something else, something metallic like blood. The fog momentarily receded, revealing a glimpse of the horizon, a blurred line between the grey sky and the grey sea. The view was bleak, desolate, utterly devoid of hope. The bowl's vibration reached a fever pitch, a physical assault on my senses. Complete integration initiated, the voice declared. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. My hand clenched into a fist, the knuckles white with tension. I wanted to resist, to fight back, but my muscles felt leaden, unresponsive. The cat let out another of those distorted mews. Thevend ring ring. The sound seemed to resonate from within my very bones. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a sensation of something shifting, something changing. My shadow moved, not in response to my will, but independently, purposefully. It circled me, a dark, oily silhouette against the gloom. I tried to step away, to reclaim my space, but my legs felt rooted to the deck. The fog began to coalesce around my shadow, swirling and thickening, obscuring its form. It was no longer just a shadow, it was something else, something more. The air crackled with static electricity, raising gooseflesh on my arms. The ship seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the metal beams pressing down on me. I could feel the pressure building, a tightening sensation in my chest. The cat rubbed against my leg, its fur surprisingly warm against the chill of the fog. It purred, a low, guttural rumble that resonated with the vibrations of the ship's hull. It wasn't comforting. It was a confirmation, a signal. My shadow, no longer mimicking my movements, reached out, its hand extending towards the swirling fog. A hand that felt familiar. A hand that felt like my own. My wrist began to tremble. A metallic taste bloomed on my tongue. The fog enveloped the hand. I wiped at my face again, the back of my hand coming away clean. Impossible. It felt like fine wire, invisible cobwebs clinging to the moisture on my skin. A phantom sensation. The air itself felt thick, not with humidity, but with something particulate, something I couldn't quite register. Refine your sensory input for optimal data flow, the voice suggested, smooth as polished chrome, annoying and efficient. As if recalibrating my perception would solve anything. It wouldn't even slow the process. The deck plates vibrated beneath my boots, a low-frequency tremor that resonated up my spine. Not a mechanical tremor, not exactly. More organic, like the slow, deliberate pulse of a vast creature. The light bulb suspended from the low-slung ceiling of the corridor beyond pulsed with a weak, sickly luminescence. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate, merely enough to highlight the slickness of the metal surfaces. The residue. It wasn't oil, not precisely. It was viscous, iridescent, and smelled of burnt sugar and ozone. A phantom sweetness overlaid with a tang of something corroded. The fog had retreated, but its presence lingered, a pressure against my eardrums. A low, droning hum, like a forest phone line, stretched taut and vibrating. The cat, a skeletal white shape against the muted gray of the ship's hull, watched me with those unsettling eyes. No reflection, only absorption. It wasn't observing me, not in the conventional sense. It was cataloging, quantifying. The way a machine analyzes data. The bowl's vibration had subsided, but the resonance remained, a tightness in my chest. I pressed a hand against my sternum, feeling the faint, erratic rhythm of my heartbeat. It felt distant, as if I was observing it from a remove. I tried to focus on the physical sensations, the texture of the metal railing beneath my fingers, cold, damp, pitted with rust. But even that felt off, distorted, as if my sense of touch was malfunctioning. The ship groaned, a slow, drawn-out creak that echoed through the emptiness. It wasn't the sound of metal flexing, but of something shifting beneath the surface, something settling. The cat's tail twitched, a slow, deliberate movement. It didn't seem interested in the fog, or the residue, or even me. It was focused on something else, something beyond my perception. My shadow stretched long and distorted across the deck, a dark stain against the pale metal. It moved independently, a subtle shift, a slight twitch. I glanced down, expecting to find my own body mirroring the movement, but my limbs felt heavy, sluggish, unresponsive. It wasn't paralysis, it was resistance. A growing disconnect between my will and my body. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified. It was something colder, sharper, like the tang of battery acid. I reached up and ran my hand across my forehead, wiping away the phantom cobwebs. More of the sensation clinging to my skin. The air grew thicker, heavier, pressing down on me. I could feel the static electricity building, prickling my skin. The hairs on my arms stood on end. A faint, acrid smell, like burning plastic, filled my nostrils. The cat's gaze locked onto mine. Not a challenge, not a threat, an assessment, a calculation. The deck tilted again, a more pronounced shift this time. A wave of nausea rolled through me, and I gripped the railing for support. The fog began to coalesce around my shadow, swirling and thickening, obscuring its form. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was something else, something taking shape. The bowl's resonance surged, a wave of energy that washed over me, leaving me feeling drained and disoriented. My shadow's hand extended towards the light bulb. Not my will, not my intention. The movement was fluid, purposeful, terrifyingly precise. My legs locked, refusing to obey my commands. My muscles felt rigid, unresponsive. I tried to pull back, to resist, but it was like trying to move underwater. The fog swirled around the hand, enveloping it, consuming it. The light bulb flared, a blinding white light that burned into my retinas, and I knelt. I knelt before the light bulb, my shadow's hand now fused with my own, the fog swirling around us, a silent, enveloping embrace. The blade was too clean, stainless, the kind you'd find in a surgeon's kit, not some rusted relic from a junk drawer. I should have known better than to trust anything left behind in this place. The air in the corridor was thick with the low, droning hum of the Tibetan bowl, its vibration embedding itself in my teeth. Calibrating the resonance matrix, the voice was back, smoother than ever, as if it had been fine-tuned just for me. Annoying. Redundant. I clenched my jaw, the metallic tang of the blade's edge cutting into my palm as I wrapped my fingers around the hilt. The knife was cold. Not the cold of ice, but the cold of something that had been stored too long in a dark place. Something that had forgotten warmth. The light bulb above flickered, its sickly glow casting long, skeletal shadows that didn't match my movements. My shadow, no, fully there, crouched against the wall like a dog waiting for a command. It didn't move when I stepped closer. Didn't even blink. Just watched me with those hollow, pupil-less eyes. I exhaled through my nose, the breath coming out in a slow, controlled stream. Optimizing sensory input fun. The voice again. But this time it wasn't just in my head. It was in the air, vibrating through the metal plates beneath my boots. The ship groaned. A slow, deliberate shift, like something massive settling into place. The cat, still that skeletal white shape, was perched on a ledge, its tail flicking once, twice, not at me. Not at the knife. At the fog, coiled around the edges of the corridor like a living thing, I lifted the blade. The weight was wrong. Too light. As if the knife had been hollowed out, its core replaced with something lighter, something that didn't belong. My shadow, it mimicked the motion, its own blade glinting in the sickly light. Not a reflection. A separate entity moving in perfect sync with my every twitch. I should have resisted, should have forced my hand down. But my muscles locked, my arm lifting on its own, the blade tracing a slow, deliberate path toward my forearm. The first cut was shallow. A test. The edge bit into my skin, but no blood welled up, no copper tang, no warm wetness. Just a faint, ghostly pressure, like the knife had sliced through mist instead of flesh. My shadow's blade mirrored mine, its cut identical, perfect. The bowl's hum surged, a high-pitched fish-cry that made my teeth ache. The fog thickened, swirling around my shadow's ankles like smoke in an updraft. I tried to speak. My lips moved, but no sound came out. The voice filled the gap, protocol for system optimization. The words echoed, distorted, as if they were coming from somewhere else entirely. Not my mouth, not the voice in my head. The voice of the ship itself, the voice of the fog, the voice of whatever was wearing my skin like a second suit. My shadow took a step forward. Not a step. A shift, fluid, seamless like a puppet on strings that had suddenly gained autonomy. The fog coiled around its legs, rising to its waist, its chest. It didn't flinch, didn't react. Just kept moving, blade still raised toward the center of the corridor where the light bulb hung like a dying star. I should have fought it. Should have screamed. Should have done to it something, but my body was just a passenger now. A shell being piloted by something else. My shadow took another step, then another. The fog swallowed it up to its knees, then its waist, then its chest. The bol sushishke became a wail, a high, keening note that made my skull vibrate. And then it stepped into the fog. Not a step, a dissolution. One moment my shadow was there, blade raised. The next it was gone. The fog closed around it like a mouth, swallowing it whole. The bol's note held, a single unbroken scream of sound, and then silence. The corridor was empty. The knife was still in my hand. My forearm was unmarked. No cuts, no blood, no shadow, just me. And the voice smooth as polished chrome, whispering in the dark, Farah calibration complete. The console hummed, a low thrum that vibrated through my teeth. Not the comforting hum of machinery, but a strained, desperate whine. Static crackled from the speakers, a white noise that seemed to burrow into my skull. I reached for the launch lever, the metal cold and slick beneath my fingers. Initiate lifeboat deployment sequence. The voice still smooth, still infuriating. The static intensified, a sharp, stinging sensation against my skin. It raised the hairs on my arms, a prickling that felt like invisible cobwebs clinging to my face. I ignored it, focused on the lever. Years of software debugging had taught me to filter out distractions, to isolate the problem and fix it. But this felt different. This wasn't a corrupted file. This was something PLC. The launch button resisted, then gave with a shudder. A cascade of warning lights flashed across the panel, crimson, amber, sickly green, a chaotic ballet of impending failure. The static escalated, a high-pitched whine that blurred the edges of my vision. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the noise to subside. Full system integration required. Resistance is futile. The voice. Always the voice. I gripped the lever tighter, forcing it down. A grinding metallic groan echoed through the corridor, a protest from the ancient machinery. The lifeboat door began to retract, slowly, agonizingly slowly. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone, and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar, like burned sugar and rusted iron. The cat watched from the shadows, its blue eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. It hadn't moved since I'd entered the corridor. Just watched a skeletal white shape, a silent observer in this decaying theater of dread. It tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement, as if assessing my progress. Its scarred face was a map of some unspoken horror. Another jolt, stronger this time. The lights flickered violently, threatening to plunge the corridor into darkness. I felt a pressure building in my ears, a dull ache behind my eyes. The static was almost deafening now, a white wall of noise that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I tasted metal on my tongue, a faint coppery tang that clung to the back of my throat. Optimizing launch parameters. Hoven. The voice was closer now, almost within earshot. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to scream. The lifeboat door inched further open, revealing a glimpse of the storm-tossed sea beyond. Grey, churning, hungry. The door was halfway open. The metal shrieked in protest, a tortured wail that reverberated through the ship. I could feel the ship itself resisting, straining against the effort. It wasn't just machinery failing. It was something more. Something sentient. Something that didn't want me to leave. The static reached a fever pitch, a blinding white roar that filled my head. My vision blurred, the world dissolving into a swirling vortex of light and noise. I stumbled, catching myself on the console. A cold, clammy hand brushed against mine. Not my hand. Something else. Something wrong. For system integration nearing completion. Phew. The voice triumphant now, dripping with a perverse satisfaction. The lifeboat door slammed shut. The suddenness of it was brutal. A jarring clang that echoed through the corridor, cutting through the static like a knife. I was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the emergency lamps. The air was thick, stale, suffocating. The scent of ozone burned my nostrils. I pounded on the door, a frantic, desperate rhythm. "Hi, open," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. Fifing let me out. No response. Just the hum of the machinery, the relentless, oppressive hum that seemed to burrow into my very bones. The cat materialized in the corner of the lifeboat, its blue eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. It sat there perfectly still, watching me, judging me, a silent sentinel in my metal prison. I sank to the floor, my legs trembling. The taste of copper intensified, a metallic bitterness that coated my tongue. I ran my hands over my face, feeling for, what, scars, marks, something that would explain this, Site protocol initiated 40. The voice soft now, almost a whisper. Footainment successful. I looked down at my hands. They weren't my hands, not entirely. They were elongated. The fingers too thin, the knuckles too prominent. The skin was pale, almost translucent. Veins, thick and blue, snaked across the backs of my hands like rivers on a map. I raised my arms, examining them in the dim light. The reflection wasn't mine, not entirely. The face staring back at me was familiar, yet subtly altered. The eyes were wider, the mouth thinner, the skin stretched taut over the bone. A grotesque parody of my own features. The cat let out a single, soft thump thump thump. A sound like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. The door began to glow, a faint ethereal blue. Not the light of the emergency lamps, something else. Something new, welcome home. The voice, final, complete. The console's interface glowed a sickly milk white, its edges fraying like the edges of a photograph left too long in the sun. Dissolve the outdated interface. My fingers hovered over the keys, the scent of ozone thick in the air clinging to my skin like a second layer. The cat crouched on the edge of the panel, its body coiled tight, a white blur against the monochrome backdrop. Its blue eyes too wide, too knowing, locked onto mine. The mew it let out wasn't a sound at all, but a vibration, a thrum, that traveled up my spine and settled behind my teeth. It sounded like a phone ringing in an empty forest, the kind of ring that doesn't stop, that 20 waits for you to answer. I exhaled through my nose, the air tasting of burnt wiring and something older, something like the inside of an abandoned server room. The fog, the fucking fog, rolled across the floor in slow, deliberate waves, its surface shifting like oil on water. It didn't move like wind. It moved like a living thing, like the slow, inevitable spread of a virus through a network. And my shadow, my God, my shadow twitched at the edges, a dark, jagged thing that no longer matched the angle of the light. It stretched, elongated, as if reaching for the fog. I could feel it twin pulling, a weight against my back, a presence that wasn't me but was twin by. All the same. You're not touching it, I said, voice steady, fingers still hovering. The words came out wrong, too smooth, too corporate. Optimize, contain. Dissolve. Contain, dissolve. The fog pulsed a slow, rhythmic rise and fall, like breathing, or like a heart. The cat's tail lashed once, a single violent flick that sent a ripple through the air. A dead mouse, no, not a mouse. Something fine worse, tumbled from its mouth, its fur matted, its eyes still open, still void wet. It hit the floor with a wet with the dewy, and for a second I thought it was dead. Then it twitched. A single, convulsive jerk, and the fog moved sliding over it like a blanket, absorbing it. The creature didn't scream, it didn't even funkin' breathe. It just dissolved. The fog swallowed it whole, and the air smelled like copper again, like the first time I'd cut myself open trying to debug a line of code that didn't exist. I swallowed hard. You don't get to decide. My shadow laughed. Not a sound, but a vibration in my bones, a pressure behind my ribs. It pressed forward, fingers soared, stretching toward the fog. The tips of them weren't mine anymore. They were too long, too thin. The skin stretched tight over something wrong beneath. The fog rippled in response, hungry, and I could feel seal. It a cold, clammy touch against the back of my neck. No, I said, but my voice wasn't mine. It was the voice from the console, smooth, infuriating, wrong. Dissolve. The outdated interface. The fog simmered faster now, a wave crashing against the edge of my shadow. My hand twitched, and the fingers dipped into the fog. It wasn't cold. It wasn't wet. It was surreal, a living thing that clung to my skin like a second layer, that twin pulled it at my face, my eyes, my twindo. I jerked back, but the fog had already found me. It slid up my arm, creeping like a second skin, and I could twin feel. It reading me, mapping me. The way a program maps a system, line by line, function by function. My vision blurred, the edges of the world warping, and the cat's mew became a fruit scream, a high-pitched, endless wail that filled my skull. The fog pulled at my face, and I could feel my skin stretching, feel the bones beneath shift too, and then the pain was a white-hot blade, a food rewrite, a dissolve. My face wasn't mine anymore. The fog had taken it piece by piece, and what was left was something twin smooth, something twin wrong. The skin too tight, the eyes too wide, the mouth a thin, lipless line. The console's voice laughed, a sound like 1,000 static-filled speakers all at once, and the cat's mew became a thump-thump, thump, a heartbeat, a fog pulse, the fog breathing through me. I was still me, or I was still me, or I was something like me, and the fog was them home. The deck planks burned under my bare feet, the overexposed sunlight bleaching them to a sickly yellow that hurt to look at. I stood frozen, the cobwebs on my face, those invisible, sticky threads I'd felt since the fog took my reflection, tightening like a second skin. My shadow wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a separate thing, coiled and waiting, while my real body remained utterly still. The Tibetan bowl on the deck rail rang, a pure, high tone that cut the air like a knife, sharp and clean, each note vibrating up my spine and settling behind my teeth. Thring, thring, thring. The cat watched from the railing, blue eyes wide and unblinking, its white fur gleaming under the harsh sun. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched as my shadow began to peel away. Not a slow drift, but a slipping from paper, like wet ink lifting from paper. The air around it rippled, cold and oily, and I could feel the absence where my body should have been. My breath hitched, a dry rasp in my throat. This isn't happening. This isn't part of the protocol. The words felt false, corporate, the kind of lies I'd used to justify the console's demands. But the shadow didn't care. It stretched, elongating past my ankles, past my knees, moving with a smooth, unnatural grace. It didn't cast a reflection on the deck. It soothed the reflection, the real thing, dissolve the outdated interface. The phrase echoed in my skull, but it wasn't my voice anymore. It was the console's smooth, infuriating tone. The bowl rang again, a single, pure tone that made my teeth ache. Hoothring. The cat's tail flicked once, a tiny, violent motion, and I saw its blue eyes narrow. The shadow reached for the railing, fingers, my fingers, see? But they weren't mine. They were too long, too thin. The skin stretched tight over something wrong beneath. It slid its hand into the fog, not stepping into it, but sinking into it, as if the fog was water. The fog didn't resist. I accepted it, wrapping around the shadow like a second skin. The fog pulsed, a slow, rhythmic rise and fall, and the shadow didn't just move. It became part of the fog, a darker patch within the shifting, oily surface. The cobwebs on my face tightened, pulling my skin into a mask, and I could feel the fog shredding me again, line by line, function by function. The cat's mew became a low, continuous hum, a thrum-thrum, that vibrated in my chest. The bowl rang once more, a single, clear note that filled the deck, then stopped. Silence. Not empty silence, but the silence of something twin complete. The shadow was gone. The fog was still. The deck was still. The cat turned its head, blue eyes locking onto my face, and I felt the weight of its gaze. Cold, analytical, freeding. I swallowed hard. The taste of copper filled my mouth, sharp and metallic. The cobwebs on my face felt like they were stitching my skin shut. The protocol is complete. Footy. The words weren't mine. They were the console's voice, smooth and final. The fog shifted, not like wind, but like a slow, deliberate movement, and I saw my shadow step into the fog. It didn't disappear. It went to see the fog, a darker, denser patch moving with the current. The deck was empty. The fog was home. The cat's mew became a thump, thump. Thoo, a heartbeat. The fog were breathing through me. I was still me, or I was something like me. The bowl was silent. The fog was home.